And getting into a number of this conversation for this hour, we're talking about autism. It's a conversation that we have had before, but in my opinion, it's a conversation that we don't have enough in terms of what is happening, in terms of how it's been progressing. And we're talking about the other side of autism today. And we have two guests in the studio today who join us, Dr. Jane Muiruri and Perpetua Omondi. Dr. Jane Muiruri is a healthcare management expert, while Perpetua Omondi is a founder and Dynamic Occupational Therapy Limited. Ladies, good morning to you both.
Morning to
Good morning. Karibu sana. Thank you for being here this morning. Not an easy topic, but one that's important, and so that we're glad that you're here with us to have this conversation. But before we get into the nitty-gritty of autism, we're going to welcome you to the Situation Room. CT here usually has a proverb, and he goes around Africa every week. Privileged man, this one. And he comes back from a different country with a basket full of proverbs. He'll tell you where he is this week, and then he'll tell you what the proverb is, and then you can tell us what your interpretation of the same would be. All right? Okay.
There's a body on this planet called the Global Slavery Index. You would think that with the understanding that slavery was abolished, that
such a body wouldn't exist.
Yes, exactly. But it appears that even with all the freedoms we speak of, and all the democracy we speak of, there are countries that still practice slavery. I'm going to park that and come back to it later. We are in the Islamic Republic of Mauritania, okay, the 11th largest country in Africa, 20th largest country in the world. Population around 4.3 million people. 90% of the country, desert, part of the Sahara Desert, but a country rich in minerals. Very rich in minerals. And yet, it's one of the poorest countries on the continent. It's strange that a continent so rich, a continent that everybody wants to be part of, still has some of the poorest people on the planet. Now, let's back to the index. The index I spoke of, they study modern slavery. You didn't know such a thing exists? It does. Mm-hmm. And according to this particular global slavery index, this country has an estimated number of 90,000 slaves.
Wow.
If the proverb were from Kenya, I would have given you the Kenyan index. But we are not in Kenya this week. Now the proverb: if you watch your pot, your food will not burn. As I mentioned in the previous hours, the pot I'm referring to here is not the pot belly. I am referring to that utensil that you use for cooking, pot. And for those who are inclined towards focusing on extreme infinity, it's not something you smoke either.
Extreme infinity, all right.
Yes. Now the meaning. What do you think this proverb is trying to tell us? How do you interpret the meaning of this proverb?
For me, I interpret it as when we watch what we are supposed to do, if that is my daily thing or that is what I find important, whatever I'm doing will not go to loss.
Mm-hmm. Good.
Okay. What about you, Dr.
For me, it comes down to one word: focus on what it is that you're doing and what you're delivering, and it will go right. You don't focus, you lose it.
Absolutely.
Spot on.
Indeed.
Spot on.
The way to go.
Yes.
For sure. Autism. When we started talking about autism on this side of the pond, it's possible that very, very many young adults had already suffered the throes of autism for a very long time. And it was crazy, really, but unbeknownst to us of what it was. But we want to start really to look at what autism is before we even start to look at what the other side of it is, and the burden that it has in this country and what it is that now that we're dealing with. There have been many other tags that have been given to it, different kinds of autism and what different people suffer from. But we want to start today with a few definitions of what autism is and how it presents itself and the burden that we see of it in Kenya today. Let's start with you, Dr.
Thank you so much for that. Let me start by saying that I'm also a parent of two daughters on the autism spectrum. Mm-hmm. So for me, the definition changes from the medical to the lived experience. Mm-hmm. It comes with challenges of communication, behavior challenges, and just simply fitting into what society considers, for lack of a better word, normal. If I was to define autism, I'd say a beautiful brain that is all colors you can think of. Yeah, it's you think it's a crown day for Splash, and that's where I'll be in terms of that definition. And it's unique to each and every individual. There is no one clear definition that applies to all autistics. What applies on my first daughter doesn't apply on my second.
Okay.
Yeah.
So let's go into a little bit of detail for you then. So, I mean, you are a health management expert. So also then dealing with 2 children. How did you note that your children, or start with the first child, your first daughter, how did you know that she was autistic, or was that on the autism spectrum?
With all my knowledge, it took a friend to actually point it out. You know, as a parent, I was in denial. I had seen the flags. One was she was on tippy toes. So she'd walk on her tippy toes. She would not want company. She would isolate. And also, she was nonverbal at an age where she should have at least had a few words, which was 4 years by then. But then I had a pediatrician who was telling me, she's just a slow developer. She'll get there. So it took a while to get that diagnosis in place. Also, the fact that at that point in Kenya, we did not have developmental pediatricians. So it took a while. But my clear flag, my very first clear flag was her doing a tippy-toe walk through the house. Yeah.
And it wasn't once?
No.
It was the norm for her.
It was the norm for her. Even today when she gets overwhelmed, we just notice, oops, she's on her tippy toes. And by the way, she's 12 today.
Okay.
Yeah.
She's 12. Okay.
Doctor, let me ask, as a parent, as a doctor, what is it that influenced what you call your denial?
Let's first get a clarity. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm a healthcare manager. I'm more in public health than medical health. The denial is everybody has that dream when they brought their child home. I came home with a perfect child. She's called an 8 out of 10 on the Apaga scale. So I did not expect to get ambushed at 18 months. And then I go like, nah. And then also the experts that you are relying on. Because I was in one of the top 3 pediatricians in this country. And, you know, you tend to rely on experts. Or to some extent. Yes, I could see, but then the expert goes, there's this other angle. So I was in denial for about 2 years and 7 months. Yeah.
Okay. And then what happened when your second child?
With the second one, the denial was the fact that I thought she was imitating her other sister.
Okay.
Yeah, you know, child copies the next. But hers were a bit obvious. She was silent. She started speaking now at the age of, when she was about 7, 8. She never held eye contact completely throughout her breastfeeding stages. I had a child who was not interested in me. She wasn't interested in anyone around her. Unless you had something she wanted, she didn't care. To date, she doesn't engage willingly. And then she kept closing her eyes and ears. Different noises were an attack on her. So she would flip out. Then she had, at the age of 2, she would deliberately search for walls to bang her head. So that was my flags.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. And I want to now, obviously we're going to go back and forth. So Perpetua, you run an organization that we want to know a little bit about what you do and how you've come into contact with autism and what your experience has been. And we're going to be able to link these two, obviously, at some point.
Thank you very much. The organization I run deals with occupational therapy. By profession, I'm an occupational therapist, and I work with children. And how I interact with autism is when the children come into our centers, we visit them in their schools, we visit them in their homes. We see them at centers, let's say, for example, NGOs that have children on the spectrum. So we help them to be able to get in touch or be able to catch up with their milestones. If they have developmental delays, if they have the sensory issues Dr. Jane has mentioned, the closing of their ears, the sensitivity to light. We look for ways for the environment to accommodate them. Yeah. So we do a lot of environmental modification, and also what I do on the side, I also volunteer in associations. There's one called Eastern African Alliance of Childhood Disability. So within such organizations, we do a lot of advocacy. We do a lot of education session for parents. We do a lot of activities that will be able to bring awareness about autism and how well to work with individuals with autism. Because not only children, we have adults, adolescents who are on the spectrum, and we have to find a way to be able to accommodate them and work with them.
So, what have you seen? Have parents really started to bring their children to what many call special schools? Is there an acceptance of the fact that, these children are different and that they're on the spectrum, with a beautiful mind? Do we see that now there's more of acceptance of that and saying there's something that needs to be done in terms of occupational therapy?
In terms of occupational therapy, what I'm seeing is a lot of advocacy by parents. Parents like Dr. Jane and many other doctors are advocating. So the more the advocacy, the more the access to some extent. Yet the fight still goes on in terms of advocacy. So in terms of special school, not all children on the spectrum need special schools.
Okay.
And ideally, we should have inclusive environments that we don't always think about sending them to special schools. Because once a school is inclusive and they are open, which I've seen, we can accommodate all the children. And if we think about levels, all students on the autism spectrum, let's say level 1, level 2, level 3 aspects of severity, they can all access our schools. So it's just acceptance. But also there's aspects of resources. When we think about our public schools, we do not have all the resources we need to be able to support them. Let's look at just one example of Dr. Jane. She has mentioned sound sensitivity. Imagine our class of students of 70 students in a class. A child with sound sensitivity basically will not learn the entire day. They'll spend their day out, or they'll be in the class, but they won't learn. So there's the aspect of resourcing. There's the aspect of ability of the teachers to be able to handle them, being able to know what to do with a child on the spectrum, and even just the capacity. If you have many students, it's impossible to just focus on one or two. And even have minders. Do we have minders within our systems to be able to stay with these children, help them achieve? Is the system inclusive? And even when it comes to exams and accommodations, which Dr. Jane can be able to expound on. But there's a lot. But in terms of occupational therapy, also are our schools able to have occupational therapy as part of their staff members, even from a public perspective? Can we have rehab professionals within the school system to be able to offer the needed services at that moment? Because sometimes it doesn't have to inconvenience the student, that the parent has to look for time to bring them to a center. We can have occupational therapists within the school. Can it be part of what the government can offer?
You've introduced an interesting topic
Absolutely.
Here with education. We have schools that we refer to as special schools in this country. There have been discussions about integrating them so that the children who are in special schools can actually get to a point where they're in these integrated schools where they're with other children who one could argue don't have special needs. Now, special needs, if they're physical, they are obvious, you can see it. Special needs, if it affects someone's mind and the functions of the nervous system and their being as a whole, not so. Now, from what you've observed, do we have teachers or do we have a training that in our education system that focuses on understanding? Most people who I think have some sort of training are in so-called special schools. Autism is very special because of the spectrum. You're agreeing with me, I can see.
Yes.
And you're waiting for me to ask the question.
Yes.
We're waiting for the question.
No, I wanted that to sink first.
Yes.
Given the spectrum, how do you then determine? Because at a certain age, parents will take children to school. How then do you determine that this child actually needs special attention? And how do you ensure the teachers have that knowledge? Now, this is a tall order. The ability to describe and to understand that perhaps this child needs to be managed differently. Children who are dyslexic have had issues. And they tell the story later on in life. And it takes time before it's exactly understood that the way this child's brain is wired is different from the way other people's brains are wired. How do we marry the education system, your work, and the understanding that you need to mesh this with parents? Because there are many needs that you cannot, as a parent, understand. If the child goes to school, the school will be in a far better position to inform you.
Yes.
I've actually asked the question.
Yes.
Yes.
It's a tall order, because one, we start with the parent, the identification that my child actually needs any form of extra support. It starts with a lot of awareness to be able to understand what are the milestones that my child has hit and what have they missed. So not many parents are in a position to know what they have missed, especially in the unseen, if I can say loosely, quotely, the unseen disabilities. And that is what we see in the autism world. It is unseen until you meet someone who will tell you this is where the challenge is. So first is the hit and miss. What have they hit? What have they missed? So that's the first part where the parent needs to be able to know. Because the parents, once they know that they can push a lot of advocacy and a lot of support for their children. So once the parent knows and they want to take their children to school, or if they still don't know and they have taken their child to school, then there's the aspect of the teacher being able to identify. I'll allow Dr. Jane to intervene and mention aspects of what is happening within the education system. They have done a lot of advocacy within that world, and she can be able to share what is currently there and what the teachers have done. But I'll jump into now the occupational bit, where I'll mention aspects of what synergy we can have. The synergy can start from the ministries, Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, because sometimes you feel like there's a lot of back and forth. Who should be employing the OTs? Who should be taking the OTs to the school? Is it the Ministry of Education? Is it the Ministry of Health? Then who will be able to pay for them? Which budget is already allocated? Is it the Ministry of Education? Is it the Ministry of Health? Is it gender? So there's the aspect of who will employ us within those spaces, and also who will volunteer of our services in those spaces, who will pay for us to do those services in those spaces. Do we have funding in those places where we can say we'll be able to impact the lives of these children? But allow me to take it back to Dr. Jane when it comes to the education and what the teachers currently know and what are the gaps.
I think, Doctor, even before you respond to her, we could also just respond to the fact that if there is any data to help in decisions being made by be it Ministry of Education or Ministry of Health, because absence of data would not inform the severity henceforth to be able to make decisions around that.
Okay. And let me start with your question. When it comes to data, the government of Kenya does not have data. And they missed the best opportunity to collect that data, which was the last immediate census. Because as a parent, I'm the one who actually had to show the enumerator where to put data on my kids on the side. But then when the whole report came out, there was no data. But within us, among parents and our support networks, we have the data. Yeah, I can tell you how many kids born between this year to this year have been diagnosed. But this data, we actually wait for the parent to register with a platform. Like a number of us administrate something called Through the Roof. It's a parent support network where we share information, where we advise each other. So when you come on, we get your data. So I do know right now, I can tell you about 115,000 children on the spectrum. I can tell you that those have, how many of them are single parent homes, or how many are not single parent homes, how many are accessing occupational therapy, how many are accessing formal education, and how many are not. That data is available, but among us parents. Yeah, and we're just one. There are others that work on that. Okay, and then we even take it further that we have created international networks among us, where we will talk to Egypt and ask them, how are you guys handling this experience? Tanzania, how are you doing this? And the culmination of that, which you will see, and it's part of why we are here today, is we have somebody like the Professor Bukusi, who we call Grandma of Autism, doing a hike to raise awareness. I mean, she is a grandmother. That tells you how old her children are for her to come back and raise awareness on autism. Then, on top of that, we have a Pan-African Congress on Autism being hosted by the Kenya Institute of Special Education. But it's a parent-led initiative. The parents came together and said, we need to sit and find out how do we support each other across the continent to get these services, yeah? So that's where it is. Now, when it comes to education, I'll say this is where we need to start, not even at education, at health. When a child is born and you're going to the mother-child health clinics, you have this booklet that has a graph. That is your first identifier if your child is within the graphs of milestones. Yeah, that is a clearly enumerated tool by pediatrics. So if your child is below or above, it's not just about nutrition, it's about developmental goals. When was your first social smile? When did you hold the pen? When did you sit up on your own? All those will come into factor to help the diagnosis process. Now, unfortunately, for some reason after COVID, these clinics are not happening the way they should. So we have a lot of children who fall through those cracks, and the parents will take them to school early, 2.9, 3 years, simply to get a break, not because it's time to take the child to school. And then the other thing is that most of our teachers will think of your child as a problem, not as a challenge that needs to be identified and supported. While the Kenya Institute of Special Education, Kenyatta University, Maseno University are doing a lot on training the teachers, you can have the tools, but you also have to be willing. Okay, that lacks a lot. So you'll find Kenya Institute of Special Education has a whole program on autism. Yeah. Kenyatta University has it as a master's program for their special needs educators. So you are going further into saying how you handle the classroom for this particular person. But then also the bigger challenge is there is no curriculum that is adjusted the way they need it. Yeah. My children go into an inclusive school. They study with the rest in class. There are times they have to step away from class to go to the resource room with their special needs teacher.
Sure.
But the special needs teacher is in class.
Got it.
Alongside the main teacher of the subject, helping break down what the teacher is teaching, if they can understand it. Or if they can over-understand it, keep ahead of them. Because what most people tend to think is that if you're diagnosed autistic, you're not smart. And that's a very bad misconception.
We have maybe some of the smartest, most intelligent folks.
Just like every other population,
absolutely,
there's a whole skew line. There are those who will be on the lowest of the spectrum, there are those who will be on the extreme high, and there are those who will be on the average. Now, the ones who are on the extreme top and the middle are the ones who get lost in this system, because everybody, including our education system, the Kenyan one, considers them to be dumb. Even our own law has very derogatory words addressing autistic kids, because there's the whole mental thing. But Kenya Institute of Special Education and a number of universities are really working to equip. But this comes on the body of parents calling for it and empowering them, and even parents going back to school to simply get empowered so that you can support the next one
and show the way.
We're
talking this morning with the founder of Dynamic Occupational Therapy Limited, Perpetua Omondi, and healthcare management expert Dr. Jane Muiruri, and we're looking at the other side of autism and just to look at your experiences. And I thought it was just interesting that the numbers that we have in Kenya are from numbers of parents who registered their children, that we don't have collective data at the national level. And this is, I guess, a shout out because one would also want to understand the burden of autism in the country. Do we have those numbers before I go to that? Do we know? We don't know what that is. We'd not be able to collect that. Whereas with others, we can. That you say, okay, well, X number of people, 3 in every 5, for example, 1 in every 4 women will have breast cancer or cervical cancer kind of thing. You see? So there are many, just from personal stories of people who have dealt with situations at home, they don't know what they are, that have turned out to be autism later. And you talk about level 1, 2, and 3. Just trying to understand, if you have a child at home who's at level 1, what would you be knowing? What would you see? If you had a child who was already at level 2, if you had a child who was at level 3, I think shared amongst us, what are some of the things that you would see? Because there's some folks who are not quite sure what's going on and they have these situations at home.
You want to take that?
Yeah, I would leave you to take that because you have like a really hands-on experience and you can be able to expound more on that.
Okay, for level 3, let's start from the worst scenario to the better scenario of this spectrum. Level 3 is a child who at age 2 loses all their milestones or has not achieved any. And let's track them to the age of 5. Things that a child should be able to do, like button up a shirt, put on a shoe, toilet train, will not be happening. They'll be extremely dependent. Here in Kenya, we say severely. Yeah, that's the government term, severely disabled. So because they'll be fully dependent on you, they may not even be able to communicate. Probably they'll have to pull you around. They'll be having extreme meltdowns. People think it's tantrums, and this is the community that people say badly brought up, bad behavior. Yes, that's the one. So it's easy to identify at 3. At 2 will be minimal on achieving their milestones, like maybe they might feed themselves, may not be toilet trained by the age of 5, will probably choose their own presence than integrate with others. You know, those behaviors, especially for girls, this becomes dangerous because here in Africa we say quiet girl, doesn't talk too much, doesn't hold eye contact. That's a properly brought up girl. Unfortunately, mom and dad, that might be autism looking at you. They may have issues with food. They're extremely picky. That probably you find they can only tolerate one food texture or one food taste comes to smells. So those, if they end up in the hands of a teacher who's aware or a health professional who's aware, easy to identify. Now comes to level 1. My goodness, this one's mask. They're efficient. They take care of themselves. They can do everything within boundaries. It's very hard to tell a level 1. Because they'll be super smart, most of them, and maybe they might be hyper. They may be tunnel focused. If they're into IT, they're into IT. If they're into music, they're into music. They'll be able to look at you, copy your mannerisms, and move on with life. So nobody will figure out that they didn't know. Or they are really, but then again, it has an effect on their mental health because trying to hide who you are to cope with societal boundaries then becomes an issue. These are the hardest to identify, and they can go through life undiagnosed and unsupported, and with a lot of research going into this area, we are finding that a lot of them become the very smart lawyers, very smart doctors who get schizophrenia and bipolar because of trying to, stick to what society expects of them.
Which brings us to the next question in terms of having trained professionals who can flag this at an early age. Do we have enough that could be able to sustain the numbers in the country?
We are a country of 3 developmental pediatricians. Qualified developmental pediatricians. I think we're getting a 4th one coming out of South Africa. She's just finished her training. Now, this is the job that works very hard because then some of them fall through the cracks and end up at the OTs occupational therapists trying to tell parents, this is where we are. And then Kenyans being Kenyans, we've realized that there is a market for us here. So we have a lot of quacks trying to fit that space. So if you're a new parent, you don't understand that autism is not a disease that you need to cure, you'll be scammed from here to kingdom back. And that's why we have platforms where we talk to each other. Those of us who've gone through this, those of us who've been here, I've been at this for 12 years. She's been here longer than me. So we try talking to the parents who just got a diagnosis. We have that network with some of the doctors that a parent will come, they'll be told this is where your child stands at. Would you mind joining a support group? And then they'll be given the number of myself, Jackie Mathaga, Christine Motena. We are about 11 admins on Through the Roof, and it's up to the parent to reach out. But sometimes even the doctor thinks this one needs to be reached out to, so they'll send the number over to us and we'll have this conversation back and forth, just trying to get you comfortable that this journey is here.
We have many pediatricians in the country. Newborn pediatricians. Can one detect any signs of the development of autism in a child who is a toddler?
At 18 months. That's the earliest, because that's when the milestone starts being clearly obvious on a clinical platform. The pediatricians are now being trained post their qualifying as pediatricians, EACs, East African Academy of Childhood Disabilities, does a lot of trainings together with the Kenya Pediatrics Association because they know they are limited. There are 3 of them right now in the country. They can't take on everyone. So they are spreading the knowledge to their colleagues so that their colleagues can grab the ones who don't turn up at their offices.
Right. I reckon that there are adults today who are autistic, who were never diagnosed, and probably have a difficult time being able to operate, in a quote-unquote an unnoticed way. What are some of the things that we would see in an adult today that could possibly point you in that direction?
There's the aspect of social skills. You'll find we have quote-unquote norms, so they don't really align to the norms. So it's an adult who really is not interested in small conversations. Unless you're talking something that is in line with what they want or they really do as a day-to-day activity. If you talk to him about tech, you'll talk till morning. But talk about the weather, you'll be left there. So the aspects of the conversation and being able to have that, the norms, but I use that loosely because what is norm? Norm is them. For them, that's their norm. For us, this is relative. Our norm. It's relative.
Yeah.
So it's those aspects of social. There's also sensory challenges. You'll find there are those who might not be comfortable in spaces where there's a lot of light, a lot of noise. Some it's clothing. There are those you'll find they have only one cloth texture in their wardrobe. And they are quite comfortable with that clothing texture. If you change it, they will not go to work or they will not really align. There's the aspect of being able to have things in a certain order, in a certain way. And if you don't do it in that way, they will not be able to work and they will not be able to, this newspaper has to be in this position before I start my work. So they have a certain rigid routines, if I can say, very rigid routines.
And that characterizes how they go about their business.
Yes, they have a certain, yes.
So if I'm fastidious and I like things in a certain way, I don't have signs of autism.
So then there are checklists. So there'll be checklists of the communication. So we have to have 3 aspects: the communication, there is the rigidity and the rigid routines, and there's one more I'm missing out.
The flexibility.
Flexibility, yes. So you have to have a checklist. It has to tick all 3. It's not just one.
Right.
Yeah.
And it comes from communication, behavior, interaction. Yeah, each of them has a checklist because it's your lack of this that qualifies you to be autistic. Remember that some of the strains that will be taken for autistic could also be OCD.
And who is OCD?
Yes, order compulsive disorder. Yes, order compulsive disorder. And a lot of autistics have it.
What again? Order?
So it's like a square and rectangle. Not everybody who has OCD is autistic, and not everybody who's autistic has OCD.
Yes.
No. Repeat again. You said OCD is what again?
Order compulsive disorder.
Somebody who...
You want things in a certain particular order always.
Military precision.
And it affects if it's... Because there are those who want it in a certain way, but they are flexible. If it's not that way, it's okay. But for you, it has to be this order, and it has to be this order, and it just has to be this order.
Or you have a meltdown.
You can't focus, you can't work.
How do you determine that somebody has a meltdown?
Meltdown, if I can just say it this way, it is when it's a volcanic eruption in your brain and it can't calm down as fast as you want it because something didn't go in a certain way or something is not just happening how you want. So it can't just go away. A meltdown never goes away. Just like a volcano, we just don't wish a volcano. It has to finish what it's doing. Then now we say, okay, what's the damage? So that's a meltdown if I can describe it in a different way.
Let me just paint a picture of someone who considers themselves OCD. I'm used to this remote being here facing this side. It is moved and I know it was moved. I go to sleep and I have to wake up to come return it to that position.
Are you telling us about things that you deal with, Janet?
It has happened once, so
No, that isn't OCD. What did you eat before you went to sleep?
Would that qualify as someone who's autistic?
If not really autistic qualification, but you'll find that now the experts who now are able to give us the diagnosis are those who Dr. Jane has said, the developmental pediatrician. We have the psychiatrist,
And we have the
neurologists. So we have those three. Those are the three main ones. For us, we know some of the symptoms and red flags, but we can't really put a diagnosis onto it. But we now know the red flags. But there's the aspect of also with the sensory aspect, and even with the meltdown, there are triggers. Children who are on the spectrum, individuals who are on the spectrum, it's not just a meltdown for nothing. There has to be a trigger. Something happened for that meltdown. And for us to really help them, we really have to identify what was the trigger, how do we make it better, and even aspects of discipline. You cannot discipline a meltdown the same way as a different child. You have to find a way of identifying what was the trigger. And that's the challenge also in our education system, where the teachers find it very hard to identify what was the trigger for this behavior. What made this child scream and endlessly for this lesson? Was it because the texture of the chair, you can't even imagine, you can feel the texture of a chair. The texture of the chair was not comfortable for them. Was it that sound frequency of the teacher's voice, which you can't do anything about, but was affecting this child's ear? For the whole lesson, they can't really focus on this teacher.
So this demonstration of hypersensitivity is why you need a neurologist.
The occupational therapist, because the aspect of the how you respond to the sensory factors, we can find ways around it. How do we help the environment, or how do we help you adapt? If I can give you that one, if you have noise cancellation headphones, you can still hear, but now some frequencies are removed. It's not as heavy as it comes when you have the noise cancellation headphones.
Right.
If there's environmental modification, if you're moved from the sitting position of the child who's very chatty and very noisy and always moving their desk, and you're positioned in a different place, that makes it easier for you. If you're an adult, if you're working in a room, if you can get a space where it's less noisy, or I've seen in certain settings where the student is actually allowed to have acoustic music on their headphones, but the teacher is still teaching, but they're positioned now where they can still see the teacher. So it cancels out any other thing.
So noise seems to be a big issue.
Not really. It's just one example.
Okay.
Light can be one.
Okay.
Texture can be one. Food texture.
Flashing images also.
Texture is the biggest.
Texture.
Texture is the biggest because it affects food, it affects space, it affects clothing.
Comfort.
Yes, comfort. Yeah.
So that's interesting. So, I mean, Jane, for you, because obviously you've managed your children, what are things that you had to do to manage the situation? Because, again, we're talking about a spectrum and places at different points where, individuals can be affected. We're not talking about a disease that you can cure or treat with medication, right? So what kind of management mechanisms do you have in place to make life more comfortable for your girls, and then also to then be able to interact in their space? Because oftentimes we think make it easier for that child to interact in our space, but how about making it easier for for you to enter into their space? What are some of the things that you had to do and that other parents have to do?
For me, because both of them are different, I had to accommodate each and every one of them. And the first rule in my house is it's their space, not your space.
There you go.
If you can't live in their space, please leave. That's clear. The first thing we had to do was move into our own compound, our own secure compound. Our youngest is an eloper. Eloper are kids who just go. And they don't have a reverse gear or a where am I? They just want to explore. So we had to have that. The second thing we had to have trained guard dogs. These guard dogs will protect them. So we know when my girls need, actually the youngest one, needs to be supported. So the dogs are there. We have noise cancellation headphones in the house. Yeah. My worst experience was when somebody grabbed them in town thinking they're stealing some good piece of Beats headphones. And our world came to an end. So whatever we were going to do had to come to an end. I had to crawl on the floor with her to keep her safe until we could get a way to protect her ears and then come home. Yeah. The other one is when they like our food, because once they like our food, we stock up. Whether it's healthy, not healthy, it's not our problem. The bottom line is we're not running out of that food. We also have block colors in the house, and our lights are extremely non-existent. We have very dim lights. Yeah, the youngest, if the lights are too bright, she'll just take one of the usual, these colored mugs and just plug the bulb in, and she has her dull room. So we have all of that. We have swings. At some point we had a trampoline in the compound. Now we have hammocks and swings that they get to do. And then when it comes to the house safety, the one thing I don't have on all doors is locks.
Okay.
We don't have a single lock. You're in my house, you're going to the bathroom, you need to keep your legs straight up because you're going to at some point have a visitor, so you need to block that bathroom because they've taught us early on enough that this is dangerous.
Mm-hmm.
Anything from knives to chemicals to detergents to bathing soaps.
You keep away.
Then the lock and key, you think I am running a Fort Knox in my house. I mean, a bar of soap. Somebody will have, there's something called pica, which is eating things that have no benefit to you.
Yes.
They tend to do that. One tends to do that a lot. One is very emotional, so you have to leave her things the way she's left them, and she doesn't share.
Which brings us to the conversation around the stigma around autistic children, and then there is the fact that the high cost of care, as you just stated, is up on the roof, and the need for the government to intentionally plug into this conversation.
Stigma is there, and stigma is with ourselves as parents. Stigma is also within the medical profession. Stigma is with our teachers. Stigma is in our churches or religious bodies. Stigma is in our cultures, how we embrace people who are abled differently. So stigma is all around us. And the only way we can be able to first just work with stigma is just to understand what people have. Be that kind person who will just take time to understand what is it that this child has. Ask the parent, how are you? Is there a way I can help you? What could be the challenge with the child, or how is the child's life? What is happening? And many times I feel parents, if asked in a nice way, are willing to explain.
Right.
Are able to tell you and they're able to educate. So the stigma is all about us being able to just ask those questions. Why is this child acting this way? What would be causing them to act this way? How can I make it better for them? What can I do to improve this parent's life? You can imagine an airport scenario where there is Dr. Jane trying to board an airplane. There's a lot of noise around her. You can just be able to just say, can I help you with a bag? Can I pull your bag?
What happens to a child who on the spectrum who is not managed? And I want to segue because I'm still at that place whereby, Jane, bless God that you have been privileged to the point where you can do the things that you talk about, being able to be in an own compound. I don't think that has been easy at all. It must have been a huge burden when we're talking about financial resource, we're talking about community resource, we're talking about people resource, for the buffering, for the support, to be able to do that. Some of the things that you talk about, room not under lock and key, locking away certain things, having to have special food on stock. It's not cheap either. So what happens to the child then who is not supported? And we're talking about, little to no income, And so from that point, think about it. Imagine if you couldn't do that, and then not imagine, but look at the reality of those parents who can't. We'll start with you, Jane.
I don't have to imagine it because I see it. We intervene a lot. We try to get support for that situation a lot, and sometimes it just doesn't hack it. Okay, the scenarios are sad. Okay, because that child becomes a wasted human being, despite whatever potential they have had. Because some parents have these two choices: starve, murder your child, or lock up your child in a house and go look for that daily bread. And then the community doesn't understand why you're locking up a child. You're locking up that child for their safety. Okay? The society will watch you struggle. They will never say, can we help? Okay? And then most of us have been gaslighted. You're very strong. You were chosen by God. God knew what he was doing when he was doing this. So what that does, it makes you not ask for help. Yeah? And I'm talking from experience. You don't ask for help. So if somebody doesn't step into your circle and say, hey, what do you need? I'm going to give you an actual scenario that happened in Wasengisho, and I know you guys covered it up. Covered the story, not covered it up. You covered the story. A lady who had a cerebral palsy child, and it took the neighbors 4 days to realize this child is dead.
Yeah.
And they tried mob justing the lady. And then the lady, she's here in Langata Women's right now. And when we went to visit her as other parents, because we understood her pain, do you know what she told us? Please leave me here. Because we had a lawyer. With this was moment, she must have snapped at some point. She could not sleep, would not shower. There was nobody telling her, okay, let me watch your kid. Even if we make mistakes, you take a bath.
Yes.
Have a meal. Yeah, that was not happening for her. So she told us, I'm told when time to wake up, when to sleep. Kindly leave me here for a while. Yeah. So we went on to the prison psychiatrist and told us, I need to work with her for a very long time for her to accept that life has to move on. Yeah, we don't have the resources to keep taking care of everyone, but that's the sad reality. The other one is you will one day leave your compound, loiter in the streets in your village. Your villagers know you, but they'll be the ones murdering you in a mob justice or lynching you. This has happened in Kennel. Somebody they knew was part of them, had grown in the middle of them. One day he picked a fruit and that was the end of him. And then the same people went and told the mother at her stall, your son is being burnt over there. That's simple. So that happens. Now, going back to your question on where the government is plugging in, politics aside, we need the laws that are in place to take care of the caregiver and the parent, the ones who are taking care. And Honorable Crystal Asige has put a bill in Parliament. It's gone through all its motion. It's waiting for the presidential assent. Then we wait for the tools on how to be put in place. When you're blind and you're working, your first 150,000 salary is tax-free. They start taxing you at 151. So what we are asking is, why don't you give me, the parent, the same benefit? Because 150,000 no tax, that's 45,000. 45,000, those are how many sessions of occupational therapy? Yeah? I'll be able to do more than the one I do.
Yeah.
I'll be able to get more support for that child. And those who are in business, then what support comes in?
Sure.
Then the other thing is the government needs to stop working in silos. They need to have an integration of the services they're delivering.
Yeah.
We have the National Council of People with Disability. We have the Kenya Institute of Curriculum Development. We have KISE. We have the Ministry of Gender. We have the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Education, Ministry of Infrastructure. They need to sit together and agree, what are they delivering? They all know they're delivering ramps for the wheelchair guy. But what are they delivering to allow the autistic person who can work to work here? We're seeing more and more adults with autism who have had parental support. The parents never gave up working. If you want to see a good example, step into KISE. They have a lot of them. Step into Safaricom. They have a lot of them, but it has a lot of support.
Indeed. Yeah. Look, these are not conversations that we can pack into 1 hour. There's too much that needs to be addressed, but they are conversations that we need to keep happening. Somebody will be helped. And if it's one person for every session that we do, it is necessary that we do. And we want to thank both of you for being here this morning and being so open about your experience and also about what you would like to see in terms of, getting help for those autism, a big issue that we can't not talk about. So, Dr. Jane Muiruri, Perpetua Omondi, thank you for being here this morning.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.